The most painful thing about being truly alive is realizing that everyone around you is already dead. Sorry, but that's the central insight of Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher who looked at the comfortable, rational world of 19th century Christianity and saw nothing but spiritual corpses going through the motions of existence. While his contemporaries were building grand systems to explain everything, Kierkegaard was asking a much more riling question. What does it actually mean for you, as a concrete individual, to exist authentically in a world designed to make authentic existence impossible? What is the self? His answer created the philosophical foundation for every form of radical individualism that followed. But what makes Kierkegaard quite relevant to our story is that after diagnosing the problem with mass society, he showed exactly why authentic existence is only possible for a tiny elite, and why democracy inevitably destroys the very possibility of genuine human life. No, if you've watched the previous videos in this series, you'll be starting to understand that of all incredibly intelligent thinkers and men of history, specifically in philosophy, most are incredibly elitist. It's like a requirement to get in the club. But if you do have any issue with that, or it makes you uncomfortable, maybe it makes you feel poorly about yourself because you belong to a lower rung in the hierarchy, might I offer that this video serve as a call to action, a rousing memo, that no men have an issue with the idea that some are better than others unless they themselves feel they aren't elite. So, in whatever fashion you desire, please get up, go for a walk, eat a good meal, and begin to strive upwards, towards greater heights, towards the vision that is your new and improved being, you 2.0. That way, when the 6'7", 130 IQ Chad looks up to you in a niche reading cafe in his Porsche when Stacy hops out, she'll be distracted from Chad and bewildered by your Nietzschean higher type and radically self-actualized Kierkegaardian aura. Now, back on track. Sorry, I tried to keep a straight face. Picture Kierkegaard walking through Copenhagen in 1843. He's a strange, melancholy figure that everyone recognized, but no one understood. He was wealthy enough to never work, intelligent enough to see through every comfortable illusion that society offered, and tortured enough to live out the implications of his insights rather than just writing about them. Now, he broke off his engagement to the woman he loved because he realized that conventional marriage would destroy the very individuality that made love possible in the first place. Shout out Shorty, that's crazy. He attacked the Danish church so mercilessly that crowds would gather outside his house to jeer at him. Brutal. He wrote under multiple pseudonyms because he understood that truth could only be communicated indirectly to people who weren't ready to hear it. Most philosophers try to create systems that everyone can understand and follow. Kierkegaard is unique in that he did the opposite. He tried to make existence so difficult, so demanding, and so personally challenging that only the rare individual capable of authentic life would be able to handle it. Because for Kierkegaard, the fundamental problem with modern life isn't bad politics or economic inequality, or social injustice. Sorry, liberals. The fundamental problem is that we've made existence too easy. It's too comfortable. It's too automatic. We've created a world where people can go through their entire lives without ever having to make a real choice or face the terror of their own freedom. The 3 stages of existence. So Kierkegaard maps out 3 different ways of being human, 3 different relationships to existence that reveal the natural hierarchy hidden beneath all our egalitarian pretensions. The aesthetic stage is where most people live their entire lives. These people are driven by immediate pleasure, novelty, and the avoidance of boredom. They might be sophisticated. The aesthete could be an artist, a philosopher, even a politician, but their fundamental orientation is toward experiencing life rather than choosing who they want to become. The aesthetic individual treats existence like entertainment. When something stops being interesting, they move on to something else. They have affairs instead of relationships, hobbies instead of commitments, and opinions instead of beliefs. We would probably call them evil or stupid, but they're just fundamentally superficial individuals. They skim across the surface of existence without ever diving deep enough to encounter the terror and responsibility of real choice. Now, the ethical stage is where fewer people manage to reach. The ethical individual has discovered duty, consistency, and the demand to create coherent meaning through their choices. They get married and stay married. They choose careers and stick with them. They develop principles and live by them even when it's inconvenient. This looks much more admirable than the aesthetic stage, and in many ways it is. The ethical individual has achieved a kind of dignity and seriousness that the aesthete lacks. But there's still something missing. The ethical stage is ultimately about conforming to universal principles, and anyone can follow those. It's about being a good person in ways that the society recognizes and conforms to. Then there's a religious stage, and this is where Kierkegaard gets quite radical. The religious individual has moved beyond both pleasure-seeking and social conformity, to a realm where they must make choices that can't be justified to anyone else. Think about that. They must choose themselves before God, without any guarantee that they're making the right choice, without any external authority to validate their decision. The leap of faith as an aristocratic act. They move from one stage to another, and that can't be made through rational argument or gradual development. It requires what Kierkegaard calls a leap, a decision that goes beyond everything you can prove or explain to others. Most people never make any leaps at all. They drift through life at whatever stage they happen to end up in, following the path of least resistance, and they do what feels natural or what society would expect of them. The idea of consciously choosing to transform their entire mode of existence is literally incomprehensible to them. Some people make the leap from aesthetic to ethical. They decide to take life seriously, to make commitments, to live according to principles rather than impulses. Now, this is admirable, but they're still operating within the realm of what can be rationally justified and socially recognized. But to leap to the religious stage, the leap to authentic existence before God, this is something that only the rarest individuals are capable of. It requires a kind of spiritual courage that goes against every natural human instinct for security and social approval. When Abraham prepares to sacrifice Isaac, he doesn't explain to anyone why he's doing it. He can't appeal to ethical principles or social duties. He has to act purely based on a personal relationship with God that transcends everything that makes sense to other people. This is what Kierkegaard says authentic existence looks like. Terrifying, inexplicable, completely individual. The crowd is untruth. Here's where Kierkegaard's analysis becomes politically dangerous. He does address that most people live inauthentic lives, but it gets tricky to understand because later he argues that authentic existence is actually impossible in any kind of crowd or mass movement. The crowd as untruth. Kierkegaard writes, not because crowds are always wrong about particular issues, but because the very act of submerging your individual existence into a group identity destroys the possibility of authentic choice. When you are a part of a crowd, whether it's a political party, a religious denomination, or a social movement, even just public opinion, you're no longer making real choices. You're following scripts, playing roles, and you're doing what the group might expect. You might feel very passionate about your cause, but that passion is coming from your identification with the group, not from your individual encounter with existence. This is why democracy is spiritually toxic from Kierkegaard's perspective. It's not to say that democratic policies are necessarily bad, but that democratic participation requires you to think like a member of a group rather than as an individual. You have to consider what's good for society, what the majority wants, what your party stands for. All of this pulls you away from the fundamental question of who you are as a unique individual before God. The authentic individual can't vote, because voting means pretending that your personal relationship with existence can be translated into universal principles that everyone should follow. But authentic existence is precisely what can't be universalized or democratized. It's irreducibly personal, irreducibly individual, and irreducibly aristocratic in the deepest sense. Christendom versus Christianity. Kierkegaard applies this analysis most devastatingly to religion itself. He distinguishes between Christianity, which is the actual demand for individual transformation, and Christendom, the comfortable social institution that calls itself Christian. Christendom is what happens when authentic religious insight gets democratized and institutionalized, instead of the terrifying personal encounter with God that might completely transform your life. You get Sunday services, social programs, and moral teachings that anyone can follow. The Danish church of Kierkegaard's time was the perfect example of this. Everyone was automatically Christian by virtue of being born in Denmark. You got baptized as an infant, confirmed as a teenager, married and buried by the same institution. Christianity became just like any other social role, like being a citizen or a member of a profession. But real Christianity, according to Kierkegaard, is the opposite of this. It's the demand to become an individual, to take responsibility for your own existence, and to make choices that separate you from the crowd rather than integrating you into it. So it's not about being a good member of Christian society. It's about facing the terror and responsibility of your own freedom before God. This is why Kierkegaard spent his final years attacking the Danish church with such ferocity that it probably contributed to his early death. He wasn't attacking Christianity. He was attacking the transformation of Christianity into just what he saw as another form of social conformity. The single one versus the public one. Kierkegaard later developed this insight into a complete critique of modern public life. He distinguishes between the single one, the individual who has achieved authentic existence, and the public, the abstract mass that never actually exists as a concrete reality, but somehow dominates everyone's thinking. When politicians talk about the people, when intellectuals discuss society's needs, when activists fight for what justice demands, they're all appealing to this phantom called the public. But the public is just an abstraction created by combining lots of individual people and ignoring everything that makes them actually individual. The single one can't relate to the public because the single one exists as a concrete reality, while the public exists only as an idea. When you're thinking about what's good for the public, you're not thinking about what's good for any actual person. You're thinking about a statistical aggregate that has no real existence. This is why Kierkegaard believes that all politics are essentially corrupt. Not because politicians are bad people or the voters are bad people, but because political thinking requires you to treat abstractions as more real than concrete individuals. You have to pretend that there's something called the greatest good for the greatest number. And that's more important than the specific, unrepeatable existence of any particular person. But authentic existence is always particular. It's always unrepeatable, and it's always irreducible to any category. The moment you start thinking politically, you've already abandoned the perspective of authentic individuality. The genius versus the apostle. Kierkegaard makes one final distinction that's crucial for understanding his aristocratic vision. He separates the genius from the apostle, two completely different types of exceptional individual. The genius achieves greatness through natural talent and exceptional ability. They might be individuals like artists, philosophers, scientists, or political leaders. They are admirable, and they contribute something valuable to human culture, but their authority ultimately rests on human condition of their superior abilities. The apostle is something completely different. The apostle's authority doesn't come from being smarter or being more talented than other people. It comes from a direct call from God, and that can't be validated by any human standard. The apostle might be completely ordinary in terms of natural abilities, but they carry a message that transcends everything humanly evaluated. This distinction is crucial because it shows that there are two completely different types of elite. The elite of talent and ability, which is what most people think of when they hear the word aristocracy, and the elite of calling and authenticity, which is invisible to ordinary evaluation, but represents the highest form of human existence. The genius can be recognized and celebrated by society because their excellence operates within categories that everyone can understand. But the apostle will often be rejected, misunderstood, or persecuted because their authority comes from a source that the crowd can't recognize or even validate. The modern relevance. So why does all of this matter for our contemporary situation? Because Kierkegaard identified the spiritual problem that underlies all our political and social crises: the elimination of authentic individuality in favor of mass conformity. Every time someone complains about NPCs, these people who just repeat whatever they hear on social media, they channel Kierkegaard's insight about the crowd as untruth. Every time someone talks about the need for authentic politicians or genuine leadership, they're gesturing towards his distinction between real existence and social role-playing. But most people who invoke Kierkegaard don't understand the radical implications of his analysis. He doesn't just say that we need better individuals in positions of power. He's saying that the very structure of modern democratic society makes authentic existence impossible. If Kierkegaard is right, then the problem with contemporary politics isn't that we have the wrong policies or the wrong leaders. The problem is that political participation itself pulls people away from the kind of individual responsibility and authentic choice that makes human existence meaningful. The aristocracy of authenticity. So this is Kierkegaard's contribution to our story. The idea that genuine human excellence isn't about talent, wealth, or social position. It's about the courage to exist authentically as an individual rather than disappearing into the comfortable anonymity of the crowd. Thus, this creates a completely different kind of aristocracy than anything we've seen before, just like the video before and the video before. Not based on birth or rational insight or even aesthetic refinement. The aristocracy of spiritual courage. The willingness to take full responsibility for your own existence without any guarantee that you are making the right choice. And this aristocracy is necessarily tiny because authentic existence is terrifying. Most people would rather follow scripts, play roles, and lose themselves in group identities than face the anxiety and responsibility of genuine freedom. In Kierkegaard's perspective, democracy didn't fail because people made bad choices. On the contrary, it fails because it eliminates the possibility of real choice altogether. When you think as a member of the public rather than as a unique individual, you're not actually choosing anything. You're just following the logic of mass psychology. The question this raises is profound and disturbing. If authentic existence is only possible for a tiny elite, and if democratic participation destroys the possibility of authenticity, then what kind of political arrangement could possibly be legitimate? Kierkegaard doesn't give us an answer to this question, at least directly. But his analysis points towards a form of politics that would somehow protect and nurture the individual authenticity rather than submerging it in collective decision-making. A politics of the single one rather than a politics of the public. Next time, we're going to meet a philosopher who took these insights about individual authenticity and the poverty of mass society and used them to ask an even more fundamental question. What does it mean to exist at all in a world where God is dead and all traditional sources of meaning have collapsed? Thus spoke